Which we are.
Oh yeah. Okay. Now we are.
Are we live on YouTube? I haven't checked.
I'm checking right now, and we are, yes.
Hello, Effect enjoyers.
Hello, everyone.
First comment in the chat: rename ServiceMap back to context. It may just happen. It may happen.
Who knows?
I will never bring back tag. You can't make me. You'll have to ban me from the Effect.org before it happens.
Hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike. Yes, I feel like it's worth mentioning that Mike will be joining us maybe later, but not to discuss STM today. Unfortunately, Mike had a conflict. It's not me under disguise. Yeah, right. Yeah, I know we said last week that Mike would be joining us this week to discuss STM, but there was a small conflict at the same time, and I didn't want to reschedule office hours. So Mike might join us like a little bit later on. But yeah, so we'll discuss STM with Mike next week when the timing works out better. Whoa, Dylan, thank you very much for the raid. Yeah, typical Mike. Dylan Moskovitz raid. Welcome, Dylan Mulroy enjoyers. Welcome to Effect Office Hours, where we discuss all of the things related to Effect. I was just updating our audience that unfortunately, like last week, we said Mike would be joining us to talk about STM this week, but there was a small conflict. So he'll join us next week, and we'll do like a deep dive into STM. But if we're lucky, Mike might make a small cameo later on today. So we'll see. How is everybody doing today? What can we chat about? I know we had a couple of questions in Discord. So let me pull that up. But while I'm pulling that up, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in chat.
"24-hour talk about cluster instead." I don't think so.
24-hour cluster stream. We need to do an evening stream again, an evening office hours, and get Tim on here and just make him talk about cluster and workflow. Also, I've been instructed to make sure that everybody knows that you should definitely join the Effect Discord if you're not already a member. And also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, as that'll be our primary medium for office hours going forward. We're not going to broadcast to X anymore. We'll still be live on my Twitch and on YouTube. But yeah, please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube so you get all of the delicious, juicy Effect content that you crave every day. Why can't I find the office hours channel? Where is it? It's because I'm in the wrong section. Okay. Okay. Any questions in chat? You guys need commands? Well, technically it's my Twitch, so I need commands is really what it comes down to. What is Effect? Well,
What is? Oh.
You may want to visit our website, Effect.website, which I'll put in the Twitch chat here. And you can get a little bit more information about Effect from our website. But basically, if you want to write production-grade TypeScript, you'll probably want to be introduced to Effect. Also, go tell Dylan to start writing Effect again if he's not. It's been the downward arc of the century watching Dylan not write Effect.
Not writing Effect, yeah.
It's just hurts. What commands do you want us to have, Plague? I can try to add some commands to my channel. Let me just see if there's any questions. Loving V4. Changes to workflows and schemas are really nice to use. Thank you. 24-hour talk about cluster. Never. Apologies, my team did not invite me and my calendar was free, so I scheduled the call. Yeah, it's all my fault, Mike. You don't know exactly what time office hours is every single week. Anyway.
We have a question. I think we have a question over the Discord.
We do. We have actually two. All right, cool.
Yes.
Let me see. Maybe we can answer Lloyd's question first, since it's a little bit easier, and then I'll take a look at the questions that Gerboon posted in the channel, and I can also share my screen with some code snippets related to what he posted. So Lloyd asks, with all the new functionality of schema and codec, so encode and decoding schemas through JSON schemas, it seems like the AI pack unstable AI framework is gearing up to implement its own MCP client, or at least dynamic toolkit through MCPs. Is this something coming to the V4 beta? Should I just implement my own in the meantime? MCP client is probably a long way off, I'll be honest, just because it's not a priority of ours at the moment. But dynamic tools should already be possible. I think I added support for that when I rewrote the AI framework for V4. So in the toolkit module, actually, I'll share my screen. Effect smol. Let me share my screen. Share screen. Window. Hello. Inception. In the AI, this is not the right. In effect, source. I'll make this bigger in a second. Please don't at me. In the tool module. Okay, and now I can zoom in. Get rid of all this garbage. Effect big when? Yeah, big. That is the question. Actually, if we already have effect big, that's effect 3.0.
We should rename the repo to match. So
maybe when we deprecate V3 and merge V4 into the main repo, maybe we'll have an effect big branch instead of a V3 branch. Did you post that make it bigger comment before or after I already said to make it bigger and don't at me? Because some of you are craving the band hammer. Just kidding, but not really. So in the tool module, I think I added support for dynamic tools. Yeah, I mean, nobody's really tested it out yet. I've only written a few tests in this direction. But I would appreciate if folks would test it out and let me know what's missing. But there should be a const dynamic. Yeah. So the dynamic tool can accept either an effect schema if you do know the schema up front, or it can accept a raw JSON schema to describe its params. So this is useful for like MCP tools that have to be discovered at runtime. When you do have an effect schema, you get full type safety. So you get like the types propagated along here in the return type. When params is a JSON schema, the handler just gets unknown. So you have to do schema validation in the handler. But yeah, related to Lloyd's question, you should be able to declare like dynamic tools this way, like via toolkit, and be able to integrate with MCP. I don't know if that was the exact question, but welcome to the ban imminent club. Yes, Carnalut and FIWS are certainly in the imminent ban club. Yeah. Lloyd, just let me know in Discord if that answers your question or not. There was another question we got, Mattia, I think. maybe you want to take this one if you're comfortable with it. But Gerboon asked a question about providing services in Effect middleware.
Yeah. Let me just pick it up again. There it is. Office hours. So the question was, I'm using Effect context services for request scope data, and I want to sanity check the pattern and the naming. So today I have a current session service that provides the logged in user and some other session request info to downstream effects. For routes like, for example, calendar, I'm thinking of adding a middleware that parses the calendar, loads the calendar, and then provides the context service so every handler under that route can access the resolved calendar without threading it through the parameters. So questions, is resolving middleware provide via context the recommended pattern in Effect for a request scoped prerequisite like tenant, session, calendar, etc.? Or are there naming conventions? And that's the first one. So providing via context and resolving from a middleware is definitely the way to go. If you have things that you mentioned, like, for example, the tenant, you may imagine situations like where you have like an URL that includes, for example, in an host as a subdomain, like your tenant ID. That is definitely a way to resolve the tenant and provide that in a fancy way to the chilled APIs, the actual tenant ID. And the same goes, for example, like you mentioned, for the sessions, because you can, for example, access from the request the cookie values and then resolve, for example, the current users and etc. So the pattern checks. The idea is correct. And I even think, if I recall correctly, that we should have, let me see if I can share it. We should have already inside of the Effect HTTP API an example that does exactly that. So let me see if I can share my screen, because today, yes, okay. So let me see if I'm able to share my screen. No, it seems it doesn't. I think that Riverside crashed. So yeah, that pattern checks. I can leave you in the chat a link, but you can find inside of the Effect HTTP API docs, there is exactly that patterns mentioned for the out session, which is correct. And also, are there naming conventions for those services? I don't love current calendar. Is something like calendar context, resolve calendar, calendar scope, folding into a broader request context more idiomatic? I mean, Effect doesn't force you to have a naming pattern for that. I am fond of the current tenant, current session, current user, current calendar. That works for me. But that said, it's more like personal preference. There is no de facto standard about that, no enforcement at the layer. And
I think,
sorry.
No, go ahead, Mattia. Finish your thought, please.
I was saying that right now I don't think we have like an established pattern for that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Max, but I think that you can go for whatever suits you. Again, Effect is not something that prescribes. I also always see the question, how should I structure my files with Effect? And the reply is whatever suits you. You don't have to force an architecture, a file system, whatever works for you works fine. And finally,
yeah, related to that quick point, and then I'll let you finish your thought. Yeah. I don't think we have any patterns. I think the only thing that maybe like leaked over into V4 from V3 is that for context references, like things that have a default, we tend to use like the current XYZ naming inside Effect. And then for other services, we just call it whatever it is, like clock or I don't know, whatever. But there's no convention. So I think it's and for per request like stuff, I think it's like Mattia said, totally up to you. But I like if you look at Effect and you see like some services named current and some services named whatever, we tend to use like the current prefix for context references where there's like a default implementation and then you can like override it.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Mattia. Feel free to continue.
No, you're welcome. And last question, any guidance on when not to use context here and instead pass the value explicitly as a function argument? So going back to the things you mentioned, like the session, the tenant, and whatever, I would say that those are great examples of things that you should probably pass around via an effect on text. Maybe if you're using HTTP API, maybe the only one probably I would not pass through context is, for example, you have in here your calendar ID, which is inside the URL parameters. And as you've found out, then parsing that requires you to manually matching the schema, ensuring that from any known URL, you extract the calendar ID from the correct part of your URL. So probably that I wouldn't put inside of the URL. But again, there is no strict, you should do that in this case, and you should not do that in this case. Because again, behind the scene context is just like passing down data to your effects. And that's kind of the same that you have when you use them as function arguments. That's kind of the same thing. The only thing that I would suggest, but that's my personal preference, is that I tend to use more middleware for things that doesn't rely too much on the shape of the HTTP API, for example. They depend more on things like we mentioned, like the session or the host, or things that are not in the OpenAPI contract, for example. I don't know if you're muted, Max, or if it's only me. Not
I am
hearing.
muted.
Oh, sorry.
I am muted. I have to learn not to touch this button on my mic. That's like, I still haven't quite figured my microphone out.
I had the same issue yesterday. I saw a red light and then realized that I had my microphone muted.
Well, I was just saying that that was a good answer, and I don't have anything to add. But that Carnalude also had a question about, do you guys have any tips on convincing my coworkers into adopting Effect? And I mean, there's a couple of different ways to go about this. I think greenfield projects for work are always like an easy answer to that question, but you don't always have the luxury of like picking the stack you're going to use for a greenfield project. I think that POCs like Bogdan mentions here is also a really good way to like introduce the team to Effect. But in my experience, I think that where Effect has the most like impact on other folks' opinions is when you can use it to solve like a problem that they're having, or like having solve a reliability issue that a particular piece of software in your stack is having. So like maybe there's a particular service that is very brittle in your stack, and maybe you could use Effect to try to improve like even just like simple things. Maybe you don't improve like the reliability of the service right away. Maybe you introduce like telemetry and other things to try to help with tracing what's going on as part of that service. It's not always the easiest thing. Like usually you have to scope down to like a very specific piece of an application and work your way up from there, especially if you're introducing Effect into an existing piece of software. But I think that usually, and from what I've heard from folks, that's like where you get the most bang for your buck in terms of helping your coworkers try to see the value in something like Effect, and try to like make the decision to take the plunge and learn how to use Effect, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that helps. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. Maybe Mattia, you have a different like opinion. That's just like what I think.
No, I definitely agree. I think that that's like the strongest point you can make. You can, like, as Maxwell said, try to find one brittle, like one very fragile part of your application and see how that would translate to Effect, and then show off what you can also like leverage in order to not have again that feeling of that part of the application being brittle. Maxwell mentioned like the telemetry, like the typed errors, the dependency that then allows you to do more testability more easily. Those are a lot of things that help you try to invest into Effect. Also, one thing that I always like like to joke about with people is, do you know what an abort controller is? Because I don't think that anyone shipping a JavaScript application is manually passing down and manually composing abort controllers. So everyone has basically issues with resources not being properly released or whatever, and it's all related to the fact that plain JavaScript has issues with the way interruption and composability is handled.
Cool. FIWS asks, when one uses Effect.retry, what error gets propagated if the retries also fail, and why? I mean, that's kind of an easy one to answer even without looking at code, but basically, like, the retry, if your policy fails, like if you exhaust the number of retries, or if you exhaust the schedule that you've passed into the retry combinator, it's whatever error you're retrying on that'll get propagated. So like that's why the error channel doesn't necessarily get erased when you use Effect.retry. Maybe I can take a look at a quick example. Hang on one second, folks. How do I do this? Share window, this window. So in here, if we've got like a failing effect, right? This thing, just bring it into the center of the screen. I probably need to make this bigger. One sec. This thing here fails with the string, and maybe we can even make this more like easier to understand. Class my error extends data.tagged error my error, right? And then we'll do new my error. So now we've got a failing effect that fails with my error. If we failing effect, and we pipe this to like a retry. Let's say we do it 5 times with a schedule.fixed. And we can probably even make it more explicit that the thing is failing by adding an effect.tap error. So catch, and then we'll run this thing. Effect.run promise program. So let's let this thing run. It's going to fail 5 times. And then the program's going to fail with my error. And the reason, and the type system helps you here too, right? If I look at the return type of program, hang on a minute, and I remove this catch, you'll see that my error gets propagated up. Because like, yes, you're retrying, but retry can't really remove the error type from the error channel here, because it's not it's not a terminal handling of said error, right? You're only potentially retrying for a fixed number of attempts or on a particular schedule. Like, yes, your schedule could be infinite, but the point is, like, when you're retrying a particular program that failed, the error that gets propagated through is whatever error caused the most recent retry to fire. Like if you fail, it's like whatever errors are up here or what would get propagated out down here if the retry policy got exhausted, if that makes sense.
Eventually, you have to handle the error. Eventually.
I was about to at you again about the screen size. That easy ban. Easy ban. Can you include something dynamic in the error, like a date? Sure.
Counter or something like that. Oh.
There. Timestamp. Or maybe actually a date is better, because then it'll print out nice.
There you go.
So you can see the date going up in time here, and then the final error that occurs. It's not hard to demonstrate. Like, you're always going to get whatever the most recent error is when it hits the retry. If the retry has been exhausted, then that's the error you're going to get coming out the other end. Do you want, like, I can also log it here if that helps. Effect.catch all effect.log error. And then we can watch it one more time. So this is the final retry, right? This was the initial program that errored. This is the first retry, second retry, third retry, fourth retry, fifth retry. And then this log here is the one that comes out the other end, which is the same instance as this one. It's the exact same error. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yep.
Let me know if it doesn't, FIWS.
So we have another question over Discord saying, considering that FiberRef is being deprecated in v4, what would be the recommended way to make Cloudflare env bindings, for example, available to all fibers? Ideally, I'd want to provide env once somewhere at the program boundary and then use them where needed. Claude suggested the following pattern for v3. And in the posted example, we see that FiberRef was used only just as a way to propagate a context value, but instead what we should do there with effect before, we can use an effect reference, a context reference, and that works as well. Because the only things that's not supported anymore with effect before is that special like handling of FiberRefs, of being able to specify how to change the value, for example, when forking, when joining, etc. fibers. But in this specific use case that you posted, you are just providing down a context reference. And that's really it. So your effect.locally becomes your effect.provide service, and you'll find out that the context reference has basically adds no requirements when used and returns the default value when it's not provided. I'm sorry, I'm not able to share the screen today. Unfortunately, when it seems like the Riverside UI is broken. When I click something, it like goes on errors.
You have to like, it's weird. You have to, when you click share, you have to like click it, then like let it go for a second.
It doesn't do anything for any button. I cannot click anything, not even chat or the only button that works is settings.
Maybe
All of the other ones, I cannot even mute my mic.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's completely broken, I think.
Huh. Let me see if I can give you more permissions. Nope.
Oh no, nope. there are errors in the JavaScript console. Yeah. So yeah, it's
gotta
broken.
love the JavaScript console errors. Yeah, the answer that Mattia is talking about is basically instead of effect.locally FiberRef, you would just do effect.provide service. Like we're trying to cut down on all of the different ways to do the similar thing in v4. Even us as like the maintainers of Effect building context reference, what is that? It's not a service. I don't know if you're trolling me or not, but you're right that I used the term context. My bad.
Yeah, I mean, it's still valid that the question had a v3 example, so it's still valid to say that's context.reference because it's how it's called on v3.
It's just bad because now I can't even tell when I'm being trolled. Hang on, I'm making my screen bigger, and I'm going to paste in this snippet, and we'll take a look at it together. Just really quick, so we can get a visual. Share. I know this is tiny. Give me 1 second.
So before they complain about the character size being too little, and now they can complain about being too big.
Yeah, in before the complaints. So this was the question. It's like, how do I do this in v4? And the answer is basically like instead of effect.locally here and with fiber refs, you would just effect.provide or even provide service if you want to. Like in v4, you can just do like current and equals, whoops, equals ServiceMap.reference. Let's do this for now.
Yep.
It's just called type.
And yeah, got all of the any's.
And this really is only if you want a default value. Like you could do the same thing with a standard service, right? Like, and then we would just replicate this for the current CTX. Oops. And then in v4, like you would just do effect.provide service, effect.provide service. And this will be available to any effect or nested effect. Like basically this entire effect would have these things available. So really you'd probably want to include that in the current and current CTX.
Yep.
Or maybe like you'd want these things to be in the environment. This isn't right. Anyway, you get the idea. But like the difference is in v4, like the only thing about fiber refs that's different from a context reference, or sorry, a service map reference, context reference, whatever. The only thing about that's different is that a fiber ref had the ability to, when a fiber was joined with its parent, you could define like what happens to the inner ref on a join and on a fork. So like when a fiber was forking or joining, you could like manipulate what happens to that value. But in our experience, like that functionality was used nowhere. Like, and even when it was used incorrectly. And we had to like help folks not do that. So I think that the rationale for us removing it is that it just wasn't used anywhere. And it's just easier to lean into services. So anyway, that is the answer to that.
Yep.
Yeah. In Discord, there was another question from Lloyd about MCP Server. Is there a way when resolving tool to access the client capabilities to be able to provide fallbacks or alternative tools? See the thread. Probably not, Lloyd. If it's only used in the initialize thing, we would probably have to like enhance MCP Server to allow to pass client capabilities to the tool handlers. Yeah. The answer to that is like probably not at the moment. So it'd probably have to be like an enhancement we make. There was a question about Effect.Service.
Service, yeah.
You want to take that one, Mattia?
I can try, yeah. Effect.Service bundles method into single class, but as the domain grows, more than 10 operation, the file balloons up to 1000 lines with no separation between what this service provides and how each method works. In practice, this has pushed me towards standalone effectful functions, one for file, that yield their own dependencies, which is readable but lose the type service boundary and layer swappability. Is there any idiomatic decomposition pattern for larger services or a standalone function the intended approach for business logic? And there's a link with examples. Let me see the link. So yeah,
I can share the.
so we can.
I can share my screen with it.
Yeah, sorry about again. Got
Okay.
lost the exception. Okay, so here we have initially monolithic service that returns an object for a single affected generator. Every method is defined in line. This works for 3-4 methods, but at 10 plus, you get 300 lines per file, where service definition is the business logic. And then, because I mean,
I have strong opinions about this.
I mean, I would say a strong opinion as well first, and then we can like try to turn it down. I would say that if you have like a service that's so big, probably you have to split that service into many services because you are probably doing too much things in a single place. And that's my first like strong opinion. And I don't know if you want to say yours as well.
Yeah, I think that, like Mattia said, if your service is getting so big that you feel like the file is unwieldy, then you need that. Like that's a very clear indicator that you should probably break that service into multiple. But beyond that, I feel like there's this weird thing about like file size in like the TypeScript world, like where people, and I understand like as files grow, the TS language server doesn't perform as well, whatever. But like if it makes sense to keep everything in a single file, just keep it in a single file. Like I have huge services sometimes if it makes sense. And like I don't know, I just feel like there's this weird thing about, oh, my file's too big. But like I certainly understand if you're having issues with your tooling, like the language server is getting slow or it's hard to like scroll through the file. But if it makes sense to keep things together, you should. So like to concretely answer these questions, is the standalone functions that yield depth pattern idiomatic and effectors at fighting the grain? It's not fighting the grain per se. You can do this. It's more about like, do your individual functions make more sense as part of a service or not, right? Like here, all of these functions are going to have a dependency on Postgres service, right? But what if you want to have a test implementation of this that does not rely on a Postgres service? Like that just stubs this out. That's impossible to do now. You have to like provide a mock Postgres service, which is really annoying. Instead, if this were packaged up into a service that you could swap the definition of at runtime, you could have a mock implementation of the service that didn't need a Postgres service and just maybe return some like static data. If you did want to do this, like if you wanted to put things in a different file, you like this is one case where I would consider taking like PG
as a parameter,
as a type, as a parameter, and avoid putting it in here. But again, then you introduce the same problem of you have to pass a Postgres service to this function if you want to use it. Like it's I don't know. I think that keeping things localized into the service, while yes, it can make your services grow larger, I think it's the most idiomatic thing, and it lends itself to flexibility. And if you're getting to the point where you feel like your service is unwieldy, that's probably an indicator you should be splitting up services. Like you should separate concerns. Yeah, so here the second question gets at it. What's the recommended decomposition for a service with lots and lots of methods, subservices, modules, something? Yeah, just more services. There's no limit to the number of services an Effect app can have. So just separate things out into services that make sense. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. My hot take here is that a large service, a big file doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like personally, I don't think it matters.
Yeah, I mean, like the TypeScript like code base have a checker that is like hundreds of lines. I mean, that does not mean that that's not working code. That's bad. That's just having everything in a single context, and that's fine.
The class body of Effect.Service can only hold static members. Is there a pattern for splitting the effect generator across files? Is there a pattern for splitting the effect generator across files while still
showing the yielded services depend?
The only way you can do this, if I'm understanding correctly, the only way you can do this is to pass it as a parameter. If I'm understanding this correctly, the class body of it can only hold static members like unit test layers. Is there a pattern for splitting the effect generator
across files?
Yeah, I don't know if I understand this 100%, but
one is there a middle ground where I get
one file per operation, a typed service boundary, shared dependency acquisition. Yeah, I mean you'd have to do this.
Yeah.
You'd literally have to do this. This is the only way.
Yeah.
Or every single one of these functions becomes their own service, which gets really annoying.
But yeah,
but then make get by ID can't use yield for other effects. It's just receiving. No, you can yield other effects if this thing returns an effect. You just can't yield other effects that depend on PG unless you provide PG internally. Like, make get by ID PG Postgres type. It would be actually type of Postgres service dot, I think, type. Forget what it is in V3. In here, you could return a generator, or you could even make this an effect.fn if you wanted to. But if we want to keep things simple, you could return an effect.gen that does stuff, right? There's stuff being done in here. But like if the effects that are in here require this, then you would have to provide it. Postgres.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is like, I don't know, this is really getting into the anti-pattern territory. Like this is the whole reason why layers and services exist, is to avoid you having to do this. So my recommendation would be to avoid this.
Yeah.
Like I would just, lean into the patterns that Effect has, split your services up into smaller services, and then compose them together into one larger service, right? Like, I also don't be afraid of like big files or large services. There's nothing wrong with them, other than, if your tooling is having issues.
Yeah, also like I feel like that leaning towards splitting your services sometimes also like allows you to discover better patterns, because for example, like in before you had like this repo service, and maybe if you have like a lot of methods that are query methods, maybe you can have like a service that has only the view methods of your like repo and a service that have the right ones, and you start dividing basically the write side and the query side. And that's better because probably then you may have part of your application that only requires the read side and not the write side. And then you have a service that guarantees the fact that you are not accessing the write side. So you are also have like benefits in trying to split in a more organized way your services.
Yeah, Luke, thank you for clarifying, and hopefully this makes sense. The final advice I think Mattia and I would both have is like just lean into the service pattern. Split services up if they feel like they're doing too much, because there's nothing wrong with having 100, 1,000, a million services. Like the effect is designed to have as many services as you want. It's more just like, does it make sense to split them up, or is it just like because you feel like the file's too big? You know, like me and my 1,500 line effect service. Yeah, same. I have some services that are enormous, or at least the default implementations are enormous, but I don't think doing the separation is worth it. Also, you can just define the service type, no implementation, then you can define the layer with external functions if you need. Yeah, sure. Every function their own service. Service stonks going up.
Service stonk.
Getting paid by the service count. Yeah. Can you yield the shared service on the class? Wait, can you yield the shared service on the class and provide it individually?
Probably it meant like, can you, inside of the definition of the Postgres service you have, yield the other ones and compose there all of the small subservices into a single one? Is that what you're asking?
If you're asking if you can do like const subservice equals yield my subservice, and then in here like just do dot pipe effect dot provide service my subservice subservice. Sure, you can do this. Actually, this is definitely not an anti-pattern. Like this is probably an intended usage if you have like one-off services that you want to provide to methods exposed by another. This is certainly possible. However, I would almost argue that this starts to become really annoying when you have 10 services that you want to provide, right? So like you keep having to do this, right? Like you just keep having to provide more and more individual services. So the easier way to do this, that would technically solve the issue on Luke's question. Yes, but you still need to yield the Postgres service within here. So yes, you could do that. I still think it's like not so idiomatic, because then again, like testing becomes like really kind of a pain in the neck. If you want to test those individual methods, I mean, you still have the benefit of the service, I guess. So if Luke, if you want to do it that way, you could. But the easiest way to do this, instead of yielding the individual services, is actually to yield the context. It's called context in v3. Effect.context, and then say like my sub service or my other sub service, right? And then this will give you a context object that has, I mean, these are not defined, but like it'll give you a context object that'll guarantee these things are there. And then you can just effect.provide the context, instead of having to like yield each one of these individually and then provide them individually. You could just do this. So yeah, I guess Luke, this is another option. If you want to split up your methods, it's just, it gets really annoying because you have to then provide the context to every one of these methods. And if you forget to do that, then you're leaking a dependency by mistake. So, but it's an option. Certainly an option. Good call out, Carnaloot. You can be temporarily moved off the imminent ban list.
Just temporarily.
Just temporarily, until the next reminder that I need to make my screen size bigger.
So checking.
Let me see if I missed any questions. Twitch chat is extremely quiet.
Yeah.
Xdiode, thank you very much for the follow. I'm sorry I missed that a little while ago. Abbas, I am new to Effect. I saw videos about it over the weekend. I liked how it helps with observability and retries for LLM calls. Can I use Effect with Vercel's AI SDK? Yes, you can. It's not directly compatible, meaning that Effect has its own AI SDK, which is Effect first, but you can use Effect with any other library. You would just have to wrap that library with Effect. You would probably want to wrap the Vercel AI SDK up into like an Effect.Service. There is somewhere there. Oh, I know where it is. Skills.sh. Somebody, I think Reese. Reese has this like Effect client wrapper skill. I'll pop it in the YouTube chat. I have not personally tried this, but I respect Reese quite a bit. And he's used Effect quite a bit. But this kind of shows how you can use third-party clients like with Effect. So it's like wrapping third-party SDK clients. And it's like this use pattern, which kind of grew out of, I forget if like who was the first person to introduce this pattern was. Maybe it was Dylan, or maybe it was somebody else. But anyways, maybe Dylan named it this. I don't know. Do you respect Reese? Nice. Very nice.
Well played.
That is very nice. Hang on one second. There was a question that Sandro had in Discord. What is the status of the Google AI package in V4? Currently unimplemented. I'm just kidding. It's I know you want more than that. Yeah. Eventually, I will bring all the AI providers into V4. But I didn't want to do them all right away because I wanted to get a bunch of feedback on the new features that we introduced into the AI SDK before I did that. Excuse me, because otherwise it's like I have to go into every single provider and make changes, and it's very labor intensive. So, I mean, even with the clankers, it's still like annoying to have to do that across so many providers. So I'd rather try to get a lot of good feedback with the providers we currently have implemented before we go implementing more.
There is also another question. What is the convention for naming static layers in a Context.Tag ServiceMap with Effect.Service? We have the default without depths. So again, I think that boils down to the fact that there is right now no strict convention, so you can do what you want. But I think that we are leaning towards having just layer for the default one, and then you may have things like layer test, layer whatever for the other ones.
Yeah, I think concretely, it'll probably be something like, class my service extends service. I know I'm not in V4, but ServiceMap.service, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to like mock this out, but it'll be like static layer equals blah, 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 static layer test, blah, blah, blah. And layer I would encourage, yeah, like I think that I would encourage folks to provide as many of the dependencies that your layer requires here, like locally within the service as you can. And be aware also, because then like providing this at the root is much easier. You don't have to like do as much of like the layer providing dance if you get rid of dependencies locally. But one other thing to be aware of here is that this is not tree shakeable at all. Whereas if you do this is like if layer test is not used in your application bundle, it won't get bundled. But if you use this on like the front end, then your test bundle will get bundled. So like I think for naming in V4, we're leaning into like the layer prefix on like as much as we can, even internally. If you want to do these like static things, if you're like writing some server-side code and you don't care about bundle or whatever, this is fine. But yeah. Have you considered providing curated effect skills in V4 or in general? We have considered skills. We've considered a lot of things. We're doing a bunch of research internally to try to figure out
what's the best.
Yeah, what helps the LLMs perform the best with Effect. I mean, you see, like, as the frontier models caught up with V3, they started to be able to write a lot more idiomatic Effect code, and it's going to take some time for them to catch up with V4. But even as they catch up, there's still, like, whenever you're using a library, it's always good to like help the LLM along. So we're doing a bunch of research. One of the experiments we're doing right now is in Effect smol, and we're not exactly sure if this is going to pan out, but there's an LLMs.md in here, which is kind of like an index into a bunch of different patterns and examples that we're curating. But again, like, not 100% sure if this helps or hurts the LLMs yet, right? Like, I would encourage folks to like clone the smol repo and like point your clanker at this file, tell it like this is like the thing you should look at and understand Effect V4, as well as maybe like the migration stuff if you're migrating from V3. And just see like how it performs and give us some feedback, because we've been testing this out and it's like plus or minus. So we're now kind of internally investigating like other strategies and using evals to try to figure out like how we can optimize. But it's hard. Mike, welcome. I
Hello,
can hear
Mike.
myself.
Hello.
Wait, can I hear myself through Mike or through Mattia?
I need to refresh the Riverside UI. I'll take that opportunity to see if it's me that I am causing the echo.
Okay.
Maybe it's me.
Testing. Yeah, I can hear myself very lightly in your background. Like I can hear me coming through your speakers.
I don't have speakers.
How is that possible then?
It's that button that it lets you choose when you enter that says, I don't have speakers, but you have actually to choose the opposite one, because I don't know why. It's the same issue I had last time. It does not echo cancellation, even if you say that you have.
But I have.
Yeah, I know. That's the same I have. It does not make any sense, but that's how it works.
Mike's just like, I'm leaving. He's like, screw this.
Screw this. I'm leaving. Okay. Now I don't hear any.
Mike, can you say something? People were also saying you were very loud. Let's just make sure.
Hello.
Okay.
Folks in the chat, let us know if Mike is still really loud. I can make adjustments on my end.
I love technology, yeah.
Am I too loud?
While we're trying to sort through some technical no, somebody said it's good now.
Okay, I haven't changed anything, by the way.
Oh.
Multiple people have said it's good now. Gotta love technology.
Yeah.
Riverside rewrite using Effect? Question mark.
What?
Well, Maxwell is vibe coding something.
I'm trying. I had to pause for a little while, but I was trying to vibe code my own like service to do multicast during streams and like allow multiple people to join, because I was literally so fed up with Riverside. But that's on pause for a moment. Let me just scroll back through here. Thanks, my name. How would the experts how would the exports look for a library? Because I don't want people to import. I see what you're saying. Yeah, for libraries, I would follow our convention, to be honest with you, because it maximizes tree shaking. So like FIWS, to answer your question, like it depends on how you want things to be exported or imported by other folks. But like in effect, you could import layer directly like you're saying there. But like if you're trying to maximize tree shaking in your library, like I would suggest exporting the layers directly instead of making them static properties. RJ says, yeah, it seems like the Wild West out there in terms of how to best approach LLM aid distribution and what even the best LLM aids are. I agree with you. And I actually not polled, but I asked folks in one of the channels in one of my threads if anybody had any like other libraries out there that do a good job of like enhancing LLM functionality. Like if it like basically like other libraries that give LLMs really good tools to allow them to use said libraries, like we'd like to look at them. So if you guys have any suggestions, drop them in Discord in the office hours channel, please.
Yeah.
My 2 cents from prior research that I did is markdown files tend to de-optimize the models, and access to code tends to optimize the models. So I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if what we do now in the Effect smol repository with lots of markdown files to guide migrations and so on and so forth are ending up having the opposite effect, so to speak. What I've had some success on is by asking it to generate a number of best practice examples of using both the old effect and the new effect, and then have like the migration files simply reference the existence of those examples, like just quite literally saying to the model, hey, this is a folder where you have the same code base in old effect, and this is a folder where you have the same code base in new effect, and just basically let it rip through code. That's at least in my anecdotal experiments, I've got slightly better outputs with that. I feel like one thing that we would want to experiment on at a more like deep level is AST analysis and AST annotation, because currently the way that models look at code is through textual representation, but we're actually having a very rich graph representation through the AST. Like this is quite more deep than just have a few files to optimize the output. But I feel like to give much more understanding of the code structure to an LLM, this could also be an interesting thing to explore. But yes, as Maxwell said, we are right now figuring this out by ourselves, and most likely in the next few months you're gonna see an eval engine popped up into the Effect smol repo, and we're gonna start to automatically test for regressions and so on and so forth. I've never seen a library do this right, by the way, so unfortunately I cannot just provide a one solution.
Like,
this is the way.
You try to get like examples of other libraries that do a good job with this, and I don't know that there are, right? Like,
I don't think
can give you a lot of bad examples, but
yeah,
and also like nobody that's doing it perfectly either, right? Like, so it's kind of like whoever said it was the Wild West, RJ, whoever said it was the Wild West is kind of correct. Like RJ is spot on there. Like everybody's trying their own thing right now. There's no golden path to like making LLMs work really good with a particular library that I'm aware of. And if there is, please let me know. I'd love to be aware of it.
We know what's bad and what doesn't work and has issues, but we don't know what's the good solution for that.
I will say that if you take the time to like tune the context you're giving the LLM to be good for V4, it actually does do a really good job. But like the context engineering you have to do is quite intensive. Like you have to really be careful about what you let into the window and what you don't. And I agree with Mike that the markdown files tend to de-opt the model. I mean, the LLMs thingy that Tim had worked on in V4 does reference plain TypeScript files, but like it's kind of not perfect because I think it ends up spitting out markdown maybe. But anyway, yeah, I don't think anybody is doing this right. Let's put it that way. I would love to see examples of somebody who's doing it really well, but I don't think it exists. Seems like a cool idea. Right now, everything feels so vibes driven. No one writes evals for this stuff, and I don't know how well those always work. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? Evals are probably the best way that we have to like quote unquote validate that the LLMs are working properly or the way that we want. But Max, do you have an agents set up somewhere? I really liked the way agents. I really like the way that agents were outputting code when you showed it off in some stream. Do I have an agent set up? I don't think so. I think for right now it's very much per project, and like for V4, when I was testing it out a little while ago, or actually like right now, I'm working on the new Effect website in tandem with Mirella, and just giving it access to the V4 code base and putting in like my agents file that like pointing it at like the two like indexes that I showed, like the LLMs MD and the migration MD files. It's actually been writing like pretty good code, and like when it makes mistakes, or like I see it constantly using patterns that are incorrect, I just give it a example of the correct pattern and then tell it to put that into like kind of like what Mike said, like a context directory or like some sort of directory where you can give it like examples of how to properly use things. So like my global Claude MD, do I have one of those? Do I have a global agents config? I might have stolen Dylan's, I'll be honest with you. Let me see.
It's not stolen, it's forked.
I've got to the point where my agents.md is empty.
I'll be honest, I think the global agents MD that I have is just the one that Dylan has in his like dot files. Shamelessly gonna link Dylan's dot files. Give me 1 second.
One other thing that I tried and worked for application code, but again, with LLMs, you don't know exactly if what you're doing is influencing in a good way or a bad way the LLM, is that the Effect.SP has a CLI which has a command that basically outputs you all of the layers in the entire project, all of the errors in the entire project, all of the services in the entire project, and output them into a single like index file. And I found out that for application code that worked well, because it worked like as an index, an entry point for the LLM to basically quickly search through services or errors that can be reused, schemas that can be reused across the application. But again, the LLM of 12 days ago is not the same of today. The models change so quickly that they can quickly change the behavior, the way they work.
JJ mentioned in Dylan's agents config. Yeah, I removed that part, FIWS. I do not use JJ. Somebody asked, what was it called? Mirella? That's no, Mirella is our community manager and also Mike's wife, and she's working on the new Effect website with me.
She's not an agent yet.
She's not
an agent yet, but we're working on it.
Mirella 2.5.
Yeah, one day we're gonna have two agents that our company runs. We're gonna have Tim and we're Timmy, and we're gonna have Mirella. But Mirella, the agent, is gonna have two L's.
She does prompt quite a lot, so she's definitely feeding.
Do you guys still recommend the approach of cloning the small code base into a repos directory, for example, that the LLM can scan through? 1000% yes.
Yeah, definitely. That's the game changer.
Just because that was my recommendation.
That is Mike's recommendation. And I'll be honest with you, I tried out that like open source MCP thingy that Vercel wrote, or somebody wrote. I think it was Vercel. It actually does not work as well as just having the repo in your code base. I was like, oh, this is so cool. It'll work really nicely. And it doesn't perform as well. Also, because you can't guarantee always that you could tell it like explicitly call this MCP, but like having the code base there, you just literally point at the code base and
they are biased.
And from first principle, if we think about the training setup, or rather I should say the post-training of how models are built. First, there's a pre-training phase where they train on all internet, basically. And that just builds general knowledge into the model. Then there's kind of a second phase of post-training where they optimize the model to perform specific tasks. Models that are tuned for coding, the way that post-training works is they fine-tune the model to basically work in your code base. So the primary job of the model is not actually following instructions in the agents.md. That's a prompting element. That's how that's something that automates the structure of your prompting. But what the model is optimized for is look at your code base, understand your code base, do selective changes in your code base. The model is not optimized for looking at MCPs, at knowing the additional context, and so on and so forth. It has a single job, which is read code, patch code, edit code. So the moment you give access to additional code from all the libraries that you use, and regardless of the language, like this is something that works not only for Effect. I'm using it in Rust for, like, I had to do eBPF coding. I gave it access to the kernel so that it could look structures inside that code base. The model is at home. The model doesn't differentiate between the code of your project or the code of the library. For the model, it's the same, and it's exactly what has been trained on. So exploiting this idea is why it works better than all of the alternatives. Maybe in 5 years we'll get to have models that or 5 months, I don't know what the time span will be, where models are gonna be fine-tuned to use MCP servers or to use skills, but at the moment they're not. Skills are very new, and they're just a way of like sharing common prompts. The model doesn't even know that they are there, and the model is de-optimized actually from reading markdown files, because during the post-training phase, they let it focus on your code, and it generates heuristics where, for example, it doesn't look at node modules. It doesn't look at the README too much. It focuses on code, which is also why like people have advised us to ship the full repo of Effect inside the NPM package. Well, if you have it inside node modules, the model looks at it way less frequently, compared to if it is in your source directory. Like, those are dumb heuristics. There's no reason why it should be like that, except post-training artifacts and emergent behavior of the models. But yes, at the moment, the only way to make models efficient, regardless of the language, is give that access to code. That's the only thing I can say for certain. The best way to add the code in the code base could be a Git subtree, could be a tool that does that. I have no idea on what's the more packageable way, or for example, for us that we have migrations to consider from v3 to v4, what's the exact shape that we should put the examples in so that the model understands that this is v3 code and this is v4 code, and it just doesn't ignore the instruction of migrate and just take a look at the v3 code and try to replicate that in your code base. There are things to be solved. But yeah, giving access to code is the only thing that makes it go better.
At this point, I've like deleted all skills, removed all MCPs, and I just like clone. I just clone projects locally when I want to work with them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so dumb, but it like makes so much sense. Like when you think about it from the perspective that Mike just provided, like it just works so much better.
It's also like more similar how the behavior of a human would look like, because in the end, like the LLM is just trying to match patterns and try to snatch, from there I see that I did this, and from the other repository I see that that's did in that way, right? So it's kind of like looking and saying, okay, that pattern works here, that pattern works here, so you just add context into the source. And also, like, it's as Mike mentioned, the behavior of not looking into the node modules is the same that a human would do when approaching like a code base. Probably you want to look into the node modules, you want to look into the README, you just dive into the SRC folder. That's the first thing you do, and the same the LLM does.
Yeah, it's not a knock against open source either. For those of you who are saying that you're using open source and it's working great, that's fine. But I also encourage you to try just cloning the repos locally and giving the model, like telling the model that it's there. That's probably the only thing that I use my agents.md for now, is like telling the agent the existence of this code base and what it is, and pointing it at like the patterns that I want it to follow, if there are any. I think my agents like file is like 10. The global one that I have needs to be removed, and honestly, I think my agents file is like 10 lines long now or something like that for the project I'm currently working on.
That said, I do see the argument, or at least if I extrapolate part of the comment where we are doing open source, so for us it's fine. In closed source, there's two interpretations. Does closed source means your company code base? Because if it means your company code base, the same tricks applies. But if the argument is I'm using a closed source product, I only have the API specification, then it's not as easy as just clone the code of the closed source project in your folder. The thing becomes more complex. But for example, to use APIs efficiently, my advice is, if they provide, for example, an open API spec, generate a client for it and have the source of the generated client inside your code base, so you can get a resemblance of the same patterns. Yeah, and if they don't provide an open API spec, try to point the model at the API documentation and first have it generate a client and iterate on. But yeah, it becomes harder and harder with edge cases, of course.
Somebody asked, I just joined in. What does open source do that what does what does open source not do that cloning does? I think my answer to this question is that open source makes a code base, clones a code base locally and makes it available over MCP tool calls, whereas cloning it locally to your project lets the LLM just rip through it like without having to deal with the MCP server intermediary stuff.
Oh, apologies. I misinterpreted open source with open source the thing.
It's okay. I liked
and
your
went on a
comment anyway, so-
tangent. Come on.
I still liked your tangents. That's why I let you go. Any other favorite LLM usage tips from the Effect team? I've seen some talk about Ralph and Lalph around. Lalph is like a very purpose-built tool for Tim's workflow. And for people that have like a similar workflow to Tim, it is a fantastic tool. But like Tim even fully acknowledges that Lalph is purpose-built for the type of work that he does. Like he's very much in library code addressing issues, and so the workflow that Lalph gives him allows him to address these smaller scoped problems autonomously, like even when he's not like at his computer. Like he has a Lalph server running somewhere on his home lab, and he just like opens issues in linear, and it just does the work for him. And then he can do his normal flow of like code review in GitHub that gets fed back into Lalph. And so for him, it's like a really good workflow. But like if you're operating on a code base directly, it might not be the best tool. It's more for like allowing you to work on issues without having to be in the code base. And then I'll let Mike comment maybe on Ralph, because I think Mike is probably the Ralph expert on our team at the moment. I think Mike has Ralphed more than any of us at this point.
Yeah.
So no, this is a different tangent, but to understand what Ralph is about, you need to understand how a coding agent works and how the exchange of information between your CLI that you're using and the model actually occurs. The primary thing that Ralph tries to work around is not really per se automation of long-running tasks. It just so happens that the solution is good also for that. What it tries to prevent is what we call context rot. Basically, you have to think about your session, your coding session, as an append-only array, where it starts with the system prompt that you don't control, that your own harness controls. Cloud Code has one, Open Code has a different system prompt, and so on and so forth. Then appended to that, you have agents.md and cloud.md and memories and stuff like that. Then your prompt starts. So when you start to prompt the agent for like, hey, inspect the code base, I'm going to work on this feature, and so on and so forth, then the model starts to do back and forth, analyzes your code base, call tools. Anytime you call a tool, it's not the model that calls a tool. The model tells you, coding agent, that you have to perform an action and put back the result into this array that is append only. So after a while, this array is filled because it has only some available space. When this array is filled up, compaction happens. Compaction is different between the different harnesses in what they preserve, but you can simplify it as it's going to summarize your session into a more compact form, and it's going to restart again. As soon as this process is done 2 or 3 times, it is no longer clear what the objective of the session was. And the same happens when you do multiple things in the same session. Like you do a small task and then you keep iterating on the same session. And this is very common because it's annoying to close and start a new session every time. So you tend to do multiple things in the same session, but then compaction happens and the model doesn't know anymore if you were doing the last task, the previous one, or anything in between. So the model starts to diverge. Lalph basically focuses on addressing this problem. It chunks the work in simple tasks that can be achieved within a single context window, and then restarts the session automatically with the same prompt over and over again. And this basically keeps the context window fresh and focused on a single task, which makes the model output better. Now, this is regardless of if you let it rip overnight and try to vibe code a whole system out of it, or if you're using it to address specific issues and you're sort of manually controlling it in between sessions. So Lalph is really about optimizing the context window management of the model. And on top of that, as a primitive, you can use it to generate larger things where, for example, you would work in a single session to plan a large feature. Then you would have a prompt that tells the model, hey, look at the spec, look at the code base, pick up a small task that you think can be achieved within a single session and work on that and run that in a bash loop, and it would converge amazingly into something that works. Now, of course, that also depends very much on the structure of your code base. For this to work, you have to have well-tested code bases. You have to have code bases where patterns are clear and repeated. It's not very good if you let it do stuff by itself from scratch without any direction. I'm for example using it in a project we're working on at the infrastructure level. That's the reason I ended up building Cluster, which is a port of Effect cluster in Rust. And I had to iterate a lot on the API of Cluster because I initially designed an API that was very nice to me as a human, but that had too many edge cases that the model didn't understand, and the model kept using bad patterns. So I had to optimize the API so that the model, those edge cases were not anymore possible. So I had to do what Geoffrey, which is the original author of Lalph, refers to as eliminating failures scenarios. In a similar project, which is open source, which is accountability, where I'm creating an accounting app for my own needs of managing Effectful as a company. That's open source. It's purely in Effect. If you open that repository, there's an ESLint rule file with hundreds of custom rules. The custom rules might not make sense for a human, because, for example, a human knows when using casting makes sense, do X as Z. Well, I had to prohibit the model from doing X as Z, otherwise it would do it all the time for unrealistic reasons. So you have to use these types of techniques where you fully eliminate something from the realm of what's possible for autonomous loops to converge into something that makes sense. But this is the second aspect of Lalph loop. I think both are equally important. The first is about context management, and the second is about automation over long-running tasks. They're not really related. It just so happens that one is necessary for the other to work.
Yeah,
Which
I
is
feel
by
like
the
in a
same
Lalph loop,
the same what that currently cursor long-running agents are doing. Like this is getting integrated in all harnesses. It's gonna be quite normal in 6 months to do all of this.
I think that the most folks that I've spoken with about Lalph loops who get frustrated with them don't do the second piece well enough, which is providing the back pressure to the model through the loop to give it like the feedback, like basically
they just hope that it works.
Right. It's like, I've got a Lalph loop, but it's just producing pure garbage. Well, the more back pressure you give it, the better it performs. It's funny, I was talking to Jeffrey about this a few weeks ago, and we were chatting about like the back pressure that you give to the model and whatever, and he actually introduced pre-commit into Loom, even though most of us as like engineers in general hate pre-commit. Like he introduced a pre-commit file into Loom so that he could do specific tasks that weren't possible any other way anytime his like Lalph loop finished, without because like his particular loop that he's got set up over there commits work after iterations complete, and like it was just really interesting to go through with him like some of the types of back pressure that he feels work really well, and like what's useful to have where in the project, and like how to make sure the loop is functioning the way that you want. I'll also say I think it's super fascinating. When I was talking to Mike about this probably like 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe less, maybe it was like 3 weeks ago, when you were redesigning Cruster, I thought it was just like very interesting to consider how like the API for this library has to change like away from like what we would consider beautiful to be compatible with like how an LLM views the code base and how an LLM operates. Like I feel like this is just like a more global commentary on where software engineering is going as a profession, where the APIs we design, while they might look really nice to us, I don't think that's really going to matter in the long term, because in the long term, we're probably not going to be like deep in the code base, like writing the code and everything like that. The more compatible you make your APIs with ingestion from like an LLM's perspective, probably the better your models are going to perform. So if you're using libraries that are not very explicit and have a lot of like what I would call like magic baked into them, they're probably not going to perform very well, like from an LLM's perspective, unless the LLM has a lot of feedback coming back at it from usage of that library. Mike, there were a couple of questions specifically for you. Mike reminds me of my old boss, but not in a bad way. Okay. Wait. So one question for Mike was, what is your workflow, Mike, for coding with agents, multiple terminals and LLMs, or using like smaller tasks, Lalph loops, etc.? And then somebody else just to tack onto that, I'll also ask, you can answer these in whatever order you want, to give an example of the types of API changes you had to make. So those are the two questions that have come in so far, is like, what's your procedure now for coding with agents? And can you give an example of the API changes you had to make?
Both are great questions, not because they are targeted at me, of course, but
both are wonderful questions because now I get to answer them.
So for the first one, I'd say a mixture of like, first of all, I run Lalph loops in two ways. I run it in the forward mode and in the backward mode. What forward mode means going from specs to code. What backward modes mean, it's going from code to specs. I feel like maintaining spec alignment is fundamental when you want to do a lot of autonomous coding, and specs tends to diverge, because I'm gonna interchangeably use specs and implementation plans. They're fundamentally two aspects of the same thing. As the spec sort of describes the feature you're working on, and the implementation plan is a detailed breakdown of how you're gonna proceed to implement that. As you iterate on your project, it will evolve and your specs will become outdated. Or you're going to work in a new project that doesn't have specs at all because it was built in 100 years ago when coding agents were not the reality. And Lalph works really, really well also from going from code to specs. So I many times completely erase the specs in my project, and I tell my loop, hey, go file by file, feature by feature, and produce me an updated version of the specs that are aligned to code. And I do that constantly. Like sometimes I just realize I have too many specs, they got disaligned, trash them all and restart. So I do a lot of autonomous coding this way, but I also do a lot of human-directed coding, especially when I'm starting to work on a new feature. For example, I don't know, I have a gRPC server, I want to build an HTTP API on top of it. The first 2 or 3 endpoints I direct it manually because I want to see the structure of the code that it generates. I want to see where files are placed, how it's gonna chunk the the code into good organization, the test practices, and so on and so forth. Once I'm sure that the direction is right, then I'm asking it to generate a full spec and run the Lalph thing. And it happened that I was running Lalph overnight. It happened that I had to trash all the code, regardless of if I was running it overnight or not. I feel like the productivity gains starts when you mix and match and you start to realize when it's useful to run in autonomous mode versus where it's useful to run in human directed mode. And like any tool, you will have to gain a level of familiarity and intuition with it that is very hard to transfer and explain. Just like I could explain all of the like what TypeScript is, all of the ways of creating types, but then when would you use a conditional type? Where would you use a match type? It's all about the experience that you gain over time and the intuition that develops in you of like, yeah, this is a best good fit for this kind of problem, and it's really a sense. So that kind of broadly answered the first question. The second one, I can give a very specific example. Um, so to back the context a little bit, Effect Cluster is a distributed runtime inspired by Erlang's Beam. And fundamentally, it's an actor system that you can run distributedly, where you have entities that communicate via messages, and those messages can be persistent. When you have a persistent message, you're gonna have what we call at least once delivery, which means the message will be delivered for sure, but it might be delivered multiple times. And that's really the basics of how you do reliable distributed systems. On top of that, we've built a workflow engine. Workflows are similar to what you find now in Temporal, Cloudflare, Vercel has workflow implementations, and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, workflows are durable functions. What a durable function means is a function that is invoked up until the point that it completes. If it fails, it's going to be invoked again and again and again and again and again. With Cluster, we use the persistent messaging between entities as the function invocation. So the API that I've developed initially was entity-based. I had, for example, a user's entity, and I could have multiple workflows within the same entity. And that's very nice because it gives you logical grouping. Create user, delete user, and so on and so forth, all falls under the users category. And entities are restricted to process one message at a time. That means one workflow is not allowed to call another workflow on the same entity. Otherwise, it would deadlock, because you would have one message that is given to invoke the first function, which invokes itself with a second message, but the second message would not proceed until the first one finished. But for the first one to finish, the second one has to go through. That's classical deadlock scenario. For a human, that's not a hard rule to understand. You consider entities as grouping of functions. Each function should be independent, and you call one at a time. Well, agents did not have a good time with that. They would consider entities in the same way that classes are, workflows as methods, and they would slice up the logic into smaller and smaller workflows and keep calling each other. What I had to do is model the workflows in a way where there's no way that you can have two workflows on the same entity. You have a workflow definition, you define them in a similar way to a function, and there's no construct to have two workflows on the same entity, so that the model would not go there. And now the model can perfectly write workflow code using my library, which is, by the way, non-documented, and so on and so forth. The way I'm using it is by cloning the repository locally, and the same tricks that we use with Effect. But this is one of the APIs where a human would have liked the first one better. An agent required more engineering around eliminating the potential problems. Could I have done it with linting rules and other stuff? Probably yes. But if API can be solved, it's better than type checking, it's better than LSPs, it's better than manual rules. I feel like there's a chain where if the API is great for models, they're gonna perform 100%. If the API is so-so, but you have linting rules, it performs 90%. If you cannot have linting rules, but you have general markdowns explaining it, is like 50%, and the optimize is as higher you go in this logical chain. That's one example in Rust. In TypeScript, a similar thing we are doing with services, but that's a different thing.
Somebody said we should have Mike here more often. I don't know how to take that. Part of it. I don't know how to take that.
Well, I would like to be here more often, and unfortunately, in the past few months, I've been concentrating on something else, which is also very important for the company to run. So, but now I'm back, so hopefully I'll be.
Well, we have some more questions, but I do want to comment. I think that it's very interesting. Like, the more guardrails that the API provides, the better the L. It's again, it goes back to that kind of like back pressure-y type thing. If the LLM can't go down a path, if you make it impossible to go down a path, then you're gonna have a better time with your agent.
It's basically shaping your API in a way that it's impossible to code them. You are basically writing API in a way that it's impossible to write code that performs bad patterns.
People are trying to make me feel better, but it's not working. We love you, Max. Mike just has more specific problems that are cooler to learn. He brings the best out in you, Max. I think that's what Carnaloo meant. Yeah, sure, guys. Whatever. See if I show up next week.
But if we had to pick,
I'm just lucky that I work on probably, like, I like to detach myself from the current point in time and try to work 6-12 months ahead. So I'm lucky enough to be able to focus on other stuff. And like, if I had to focus on shipping Effect v4, I would have not experimented so much on the AI side. So I feel like everybody has its own, like, if Effect 4 exists, it's thanks to the team, it's not thanks to me. So I feel like we should all and just more interesting because I'm doing other problems, but they are equally important to the rest.
What other questions did I skip on that tangent? There was one question about whether or not test-driven development helps in this particular problem domain, like asking LLMs to write tests and then asking it to implement a compliant change. I don't know. I've had mixed experience with that because I feel like the LLM writes tests to conform to the like code it's going to write. Maybe if you write the tests first, it's better. But I don't know what your opinion of test-driven development with an LLM is. I feel like tests, in my opinion, are better for like the back pressure aspects I was talking about before. But curious what you guys think.
That's an interesting conundrum. I've always been very against test-driven development for humans, and I think the same reason it's bad for humans is the reason why it's bad for agents. The issue is testing everything up front is impossible, and using the tests as the specification is not a greatly descriptive way. Plus, the model is going to implement a lot of mocked APIs and a lot of to-dos, and then it's going to forget to clean up the to-dos, and you're getting to a state where it's odd. I feel like what models really allows is very easy automation. For example, the way I'm testing Cluster, I'm spinning up Docker containers for multiple nodes, etcd, Postgres, and so on and so forth, and I'm letting tests run on real live infrastructure. For internal projects, we have tests running on physical servers, where we are at the point where we have provisioned the full operating system of a server automatically, and we can basically test everything from operating system provisioning up to our services running on top of the servers automatically, and when we run Lalph loops and when we run testing, all of this is happening within seconds. Those are much more important tests for back pressure, as Maxwell described, and to really ensure that the behavior is what you expect, versus just imposing a rule on what should be coded first. Sometimes the agent will prefer to write the test first, sometimes will prefer to write the code first. I don't think you should impose either of the two. What you should impose is great coverage and extremely well-designed back pressure. At least that's my intuition. But that also may depend on the language, because maybe other languages have better infrastructure. Like I'm thinking more esoteric languages like Lean, where you can do proofs and so on and so forth. It might be a slightly different thing there, but obviously you're not going to use those languages to build a boring old CRUD application. So I feel like for the problems we all deal with, this is kind of truth. But if you generalize more, it could be a slightly gray area.
They're groveling now, Mattia. They don't want us to leave them.
Yeah.
Let me just double check that we didn't miss any questions, but I
don't think so. Yeah. I think we should be up to date.
Anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, we might wrap up. We've been going for almost 2 hours. Hopefully next week we can have Mike on again to talk about STM and the changes to STM and V4 and why they're much better.
By the way, last week I pushed a change to STM, which is exactly aligned with what I described for Cluster avoiding. So I think this will be a good topic for next week.
I think so.
Just remember that.
I think anything we can talk about in that domain is interesting to folks, because I think folks are very interested in how to help the LLMs, the agents, perform better in their code bases. So if we have best practices or things we can share. I mean, Mike showed up and you instantly talked about a 24-hour stream, so I'll deny it. I'll deny it.
Sometimes you're gonna have to, invite a few people over and try to do a 24-hour stream. I feel like TJ Prime and that group of folks ended up doing a 7 days stream, if I'm not mistaken.
Guys, I'm not
7 days might be hard, but
I'm not built for streaming for more than like a few hours at a time. At some point, I like to go touch some grass, see my kids.
you can
see
do
my
that
wife.
while streaming.
While streaming, yeah. See people watch you touch the grass.
My wife and kids don't want to be on stream. All right, well, so yeah, next week hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about STM with Mike. We can talk about some of the recent changes he made. We can also talk more about like agents in your code base and some of the practices that we're sort of like discovering. But yeah, come armed with questions next week, folks. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you very much for joining today.
Thank you, folks. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.